Dear guests, we are about to start our panel 3, European Opportunities through the Modernization of Social, Educational and Health Policies, where we'll be discussing the promotion and advancement of social, educational and health policies. I'm inviting the Minister of Health, Mr. Fatmir Medjiti, the Minister of Education and Science, Mr. Jeton Shakiri, the Minister of Labor and Social Policy, Ms. Jovana Trinčevska, Veronique Hullman, Ambassador of Switzerland to the Republic of North Macedonia, Patrizia Di Giovanni, UNICEF representative, Bojana Naceva, Senior Specialist of Education at the World Bank, Associate Professor Stojan Bayraktarov, Director of the University Clinic of Psychiatry, and the moderator will be Professor Dr. Natasha Stanojkovska-Trajkovska from the Faculty of Philosophy at the Cyril and Methodius University. You may take the floor. Dear government representatives, dear guests, dear panelists, good day from me as well. Welcome to the last panel of the government conference. The last panel for today, that is not the least important because it covers topics and areas covering all our fellow citizens. Putting myself in the role of a citizen, parent, and university professor, I find myself in all of these topics, and to that end, I thank you for the trust to be moderating this panel. In the screening process, the country received positive assessment of the approximation of the national legislation to the EU acquis, which means that this influences the security of citizens. This was discussed in the first morning panel by the Minister Maricic. However, we'll be discussing how all of these pieces of legislation are implemented at the lower level in practice. Last year, in the government conference, we talked more about the COVID pandemic, about the increase of compensation and financial empowering of our fellow citizens, increase of minimum wages and pensions, and saving our citizens from poverty. The topics of this panel will be the care for children, young people, service providers in the area of social welfare and healthcare, then employment in the labor market, mental health care for all of our citizens. The ones that joined us later on will hear about the main topic of this panel, that is to say, European opportunities through the modernization of social, educational and health policies. We are having the Minister of Health, Fatmir Medjiti, the Minister of Education and Science, Jeton Shakiri, the Minister of Labor and Social Policy, Jovanka Trinčevska, the Ambassador of the Swiss Embassy to the Republic of North Macedonia, Veronique Hullman, then the UNICEF representative in the country, Patrizia Di Giovanni, then the Senior Specialist of Education at the World Bank, Ms. Bojana Naceva, and Professor Stojan Bayraktarov, Director of the University Clinic of Psychiatry. The enhancement of care for human capital in the sense of service and providers and service users in terms of providing better services was topic of all the panels in our today's conference, and here I think this is going to be our focus as well. We are starting with the Minister of Health, Mr. Medjiti. Mr. Minister, how do you assess last year in the area of healthcare? How would you summarize briefly the key projects by which you are improving services for patients and healthcare workers? Good day to you all. I have to point out that within less than 11 months of having the position of a minister, last year we introduced essential thorough changes in healthcare. For the first time ever, we procured the Trikafta medicine. Indeed, nobody believed that this would happen, and we did that in the first month of my term of office. For 8 patients, it wasn't envisaged, and we received a better price for 12 patients. Then after that, we announced that there was no professional expert committee or protocols. We did that, and prior to New Year, you all witnessed that we brought Trikafta for 56 patients. This is indeed a major thing, because these are the challenges faced by the richest countries, because these treatments are rather expensive. These days we are viewing the positive experiences of the patients themselves, sharing their satisfaction in social media. We introduced 6 new drugs for patients with rare diseases, which means that we take care of all patients equally. Patients with rare diseases must not feel rejected and forgotten. One thing that I'm completely in favor of is that 560 sensors for safe measurement of glucose in blood were procured, and children with this type of diabetes, juvenile diabetes, are really aware of this situation where they need to be receiving injections, and they're traumatized, and now this blood sugar is measured automatically, and these children, whenever they're at school, can be monitored over the phone. If something is happening in the next hour, alarms can be sent to the medical experts regarding the health of these patients. We doubled the budget for procurement of equipment from 2.6 million to 5 million euro, but I need to underscore that a decade ago, 10 years ago, the budget for capital investments in healthcare amounted to 60 million euros. So that is to say, in 2022, it amounted to 10 million euros. So this had to go up 10 times more rather than reduce it. This is our healthcare currently. We are improving the conditions in 13 public healthcare facilities. We've renovated the clinics and hospitals across the country. For the first time in Sarai, the polyclinic of Sarai was opened, and in addition to all of these issues in healthcare, we stated on the outset that we would not withdraw, and back then the minister in 2017 incorporated this in the budget for 2018 and 19, and since then this clinic was not completed. We had it completed. You know the problem with oncology and biotherapy and treatment. I don't know how this system was put into operation. Through maximum effort, the accelerator was dusting for 7 years, and we put it into operation. Nobody believed it that this would happen within 10 years, 10 months time, as well as the system for control of treatment, and we are reducing the staffing. Back then the company introduced the system, but as of June it will be put into operation, and there's not going to be any hesitation about and actually suspicions about the abuse of these costly treatments. And in the coming few days, you'll be witnessing the donation of 7 ambulance vehicles from the EU. You know, citizens having the problem of calling the first aid, the paramedics, they actually lack the service because of lack of staff and vehicles, and we are intensively working and gradually trying to resolve all of these issues. If somebody asked you if this would be resolved overnight, I would say no. But I wish to extend my gratitude to all the managers of facilities, and everybody has realized that whenever there is a goodwill, the 30-year problems will be resolved, just like Kičevo, where we terminated the agreement. The hospital of Štip agreement was also terminated, and we are very dynamically continuing to implement all the ideas we have provided in healthcare. For the first time, we secured the helicopter transport of urgent cases in collaboration with the Ministry of Interior. This was a good idea that was put into operation immediately, and when we were supposed to promote it, we were going to the Bitola hospital, and there was a case of a hunter who broke his leg in an inadequate place, and the chopper went there immediately, took the patient and took them to the hospital, and whenever we wish to do that, we organize everything. In terms of healthcare workers, we had successful year because their conditions, working conditions were improved. Their wages were increased twice. In 10 months' time, we invested in our medical staff who are our pride. I know that the money and wages for them should be higher. However, this year we did our maximum, bearing in mind the circumstances, and wages will continue to go up. And the main news is that we secured the indefinite employment for more than 1,000 employees, 1,117 people. And if somebody is contracted for 10 years, 7 years, 5 years, for a serious Ministry of Health in a serious country, it's inadmissible in the 21st century. However, we are doing our best and we will continue in the same direction. Thank you. Let me just remind you that the framework for the 2 rounds of questions is 5 minutes, so our panelists will be able to answer 2 questions each within 5 minutes, more or less. I am glad that the Minister of Health presented many results, a dynamic year, and everything we heard from him is a benefit for each of us as a citizen, because a good healthcare, public healthcare, is a benefit for all of us. Students and pupils, parents, educators, scientific workers are loud about the need for good quality education and modernization thereof that will get us closer to the EU. Fortunately, many teachers and scientific workers have felt the benefits of mobility within the EU, so program activities provide possibilities for educational systems and their acquaintance of other countries. Mr. Shakiri, how to get a better quality education? Does the Ministry of Education and Science have a specific strategy that will get us closer to the developed EU member states? Thank you for the question, Professor Natasha. I believe that within 4 minutes' time to provide information on the entire strategy is impossible. However, I will precisely say what we've done and what the next steps are in the coming period. Dear panelists, dear attendees, dear attendees in our today's meeting, whenever we are talking about the good quality education, the first step to be taken and to be agreed by all is the institutional policy that all stakeholders should have in the area of education, which means that the most important part or the major part of stakeholders is in attendance today during this panel discussion as to the support to be received by us from the educational institutions, then the international institutions support that are present here today, starting with the World Bank, UNICEF, Swiss Embassy, the support to be provided by the entire government in terms of policies, and also the support by the other stakeholders that should be discussing the strategy and political will in terms of good quality education strategy. So the first factor that is very important is the institutional support provided by all institutions, starting from the government, but also the political parties that are in opposition. The second element to be pointed out, and is also a very important factor, as a ministry in the previous period and in the coming period should receive the financial support from both the budget and international institutions in terms of capital investment. The previous school year was very successful, since in more than 80 primary and secondary schools we had reconstruction of their buildings, and we continued with investment in the digitalization of those schools. That is to say, the second element is to have as many capital investments as possible in schools, and also in terms of digitalization of those schools and institutions. The third very important element related to the good quality education is motivated staff, educators, teachers in primary and secondary school, but also at universities. And in the previous period, we had some positive results regarding the good negotiations and good results we had for higher wages and salaries in primary, secondary, and higher education. And the main element is that the EU standards should be observed and continue with reform. We initiated a reform in secondary education that was not easy to continue in 2023. However, the specific results of this reform will be seen in the coming period. The new reform brought about new curricula and new textbooks in the concept of primary education. We will continue in secondary education under the same strategy as to the new laws on secondary vocational schools, because if 7 years ago in dual classes we had 900 students in 2030 dual classes, currently we have 7,000 students in dual classes, thanks to the joint cooperation and support by the Swiss Embassy in this extraordinary project, but also the support by other institutions that should not view education for their political struggles, but continue these laws and continue these programs and make them available for all the students in primary and secondary school. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that in the past, when we had COVID pandemics, we had alienation of kids. I'm glad to see that we have been able to manage to bring them back and to work on the children getting closer together. We have had the cooperation of all institutions present here, because at the end of the day, the main goal of all institutions is to not only equip children for the labor market, but to have happy children. And let's go back to the youngest, the children. When talking about investment in human capital, this means that we need to focus our energy at the earliest age on the children that are our future. We'll go on with the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy. Could you please share something about the commitment with policies to these strategies? What is the situation in the preschool institutions? And if we said that in the past we had insufficient capacity in those schools in rural areas, we are now loudly and actively thinking about overcoming these challenges. Thank you very much for the question. Dear panelists, dear attendees, during the past two panels and the introductory speeches, we discussed based on facts about what has been achieved in the past year in various walks of life, and one of the important segments is exactly in the investments in human capital, and this is why as a government we adopted the strategy on investment in and strengthening human capital. And human capital is in fact our children who need to have access to kindergartens at their earliest age, and the commitment of the ministry and my team, I must say, and my office and my colleagues in the ministry was exactly investments in this by building kindergartens and strengthening the capacities of the staff in the preschool education. This is not a cliche and a mere declaration, because we have opened 71 kindergartens who can now receive more than 8,000 kids in the preschool education. And this commitment of the government and the ministry to investing in human capital, because we are all aware of the fact that the kids included in preschool education achieve much better results further on in their education. And let us remember that in December last year, the government set aside 4 million euros for additional 5 kindergartens in Skopje municipalities, which unfortunately have the biggest problem with the waiting list. So we began in Karpush, Butel, Georgia Petlev, and Kisela Voda to allow for the children living in these municipalities become involved and included in preschool education. In 2024, we will complete new 14 such facilities to cover even a larger number of children in preschool education, and that will mean 1,650 new children will have this opportunity. When your vision is investing in human capital and allowing access for each children to preschool education, regardless of whether they live in urban or rural areas, this can only be done and demonstrated by investing in kindergartens. And what is more important, for the first time, such facilities have been opened in many rural areas, thus allowing for an equal access for these children. When talking about child protection, we also need to mention our activities aimed at children with disabilities that receive a special social allowance. In 2023, we did raise this to 24%, and as of January 2024, for additional 2.3% in less than a year. We were able to raise these rights to 24% for families with children with disabilities, and bringing down the threshold for personal assistance down to children at the age of 6, and of course for the families which saw children on a daily basis is in total of 80 hours per month, which is a sign that in addition to investing in kindergartens, we also invest greatly in children with disabilities, as is evidenced by the various rights for these children that have been enabled in these past few years. If we follow carefully the figures stated by the minister. We can really say that these are impressive results. As you say, that care for children implies care for future, but also, I would say, care for parents, and kindergarten as a resource means translates into greater care for families, which is such a, when we talk about the welfare of the entire family and care for children or children in general, we need to have UNICEF. We have a UNICEF representative here with us. It is an organization following the situation with children throughout the world and in our country as well, and is involved in all strategic challenges of the state when it comes to children, enhancing the capacities of both the parents and the kindergarten staff. As the minister mentioned, the UNICEF office here was also involved, the care for early child intervention. In the case of children with disabilities, the analysis and recommendations regarding the situation in the country came from UNICEF. You have cooperation with all ministries. What is something that you can set aside as a significant result of UNICEF last year in cooperation with the three ministries or individually, and what are the most significant results of these projects?
Thank you, Blagodaram, ministers, professors, ambassadors, colleagues, and all of you. Thank you first for the question, and I think that first I'd like to say that UNICEF itself doesn't have results, the country has results, and we're here to help you achieve those results. And I'm proud that I've been here for 4.5 years and been part of some pretty hard times here. So let me talk about some of the things that UNICEF has done in this country and in the last year in particular. An area that the three ministries have come together with us is an area of mental health. And I certainly remember pre-COVID, mental health had a lot of stigma involved in the community, and it wasn't something that people talked about a lot. So we've done quite a lot of work in that area. We now have a national action plan for mental health of adolescents. We've done the walk and talks in a lot of the communities with the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy. Sorry, the National Action Plan with the Ministry of Health. And also after the shootings in Serbia last year, after the bombings last year, this time last year was quite difficult. With the Ministry of Education, we did a very comprehensive mental health program through all the schools, which we're very proud of. And that's something that we've worked together on. We've also worked together on vaccine coverage, and this continues to be an issue. I will say that vaccines of measles, MMR, and some of the other childhood vaccines have started to increase back to pre-COVID times. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so we've worked quite extensively with the Minister of Health in addressing the mismanagement system. We've also been inputting into the Moiturman, the e-health system, the electronic system, to look at how we can also make information accessible, accurate information accessible to all parents as they ask for it. And we've done quite a lot of work in the digital health area. I want to go a little bit to education, because while I think that there have been some achievements, I think Minister Yeton has probably got the hardest job in this country, if I may be allowed to say that. The PISA results last month showed us that previously half of the 15-year-olds did not know how to do basic maths and how to comprehend what they're reading. This is very foundational education. Last month, the figures went up to 3/4, from half to 3/4 of children in this country cannot comprehend what they're reading or do basic maths. And it surprises me that this is not a national emergency. It surprises me that people are not screaming harder and harder about what's happening in the education system. And why did I say Minister Yeton has one of the hardest jobs? With World Bank, we have a program where we've looked at the budget, the optimization of the budget. This is very political, it's very sensitive. But even by EU standards, we are not investing enough in education, and we are not investing it in the right places. So this is really an opportunity for me to really scream very loudly. This is not really screaming, But we need to see that education in this country is at a very critical point when 3/4 of the children who are 15 years old cannot comprehend reading and cannot understand the basic maths. How will they run a business? How will they get jobs? So we've been working with them in a few places. And this includes, as I said, the optimisation program. We've been supporting in the curriculum reform. We've been supporting in all the areas that Minister Yekron spoke about, teacher training. UNICEF does not have a mandate to support building infrastructure, but we've been involved in all of that. We've also been involved in working with the Ministry on inclusive education, and I think we only have to pick up a newspaper to see that there are still some challenges there, but we have seen some really great results in inclusive education, in getting students of all kinds together, but especially students with disabilities in the mainstream classrooms. We've also used a social model of disability assessment, which is based on the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health. And this really moves the disability sector, not just from a health, but from a social perspective as well. So really supporting both the Ministries of Health, Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy in the area of how we are classifying and giving services to children with disabilities. We've worked on the EU child-friendly justice system, where we really looked at reform on children who are in contact with the law, who get in trouble with the law and who are in the corrective centres. We've done training of school staff, judges, prosecutors, police officers, all the way around. Here we not only work with these 3 ministries, but we also work with the Ministry of Interior. UNICEF works with quite a few of the ministries. And finally, because I see I'm going over, we've done a lot of work in data collection, working with the Statistical Office. Congratulations to the country for having the census done. And now what we're hoping to do is really get something about children so that we've got that data and we can move forward on that. We've also looked at lots of research on the energy crisis and how we can move ahead on that. Thank you, Blagodaram.
Ви благодарам и јас.
Thank you too. In order for us to have children prepared for life, they need to have life skills acquired, they need to have skills in accordance with social changes, and to that end the educational system and the rehabilitation system that is primarily aimed at the vulnerable groups should implement what the modern times are requiring. On top of that, numerous foreign investments are seeking workers for more specific vocations, something that was lacking in our educational system in the past. To that end, the changes made and simulation of high school students and primary school students to go for dual education and vocational education, and it's very important. Switzerland is especially working in the area of employment. To be able to talk about a successful educational system, we need to say in the end that we do have employable people. Through a number of projects, the Swiss Embassy is contributing to the enhancement of the situation in this area of the country. Please, Ms. Ambassador, share with us some information about the activities you're implementing in this area, in the area of employment.
So first, thank you for the invitation, and also dear ministers, dear colleagues, dear public, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm here maybe to explain a little bit what we do in the field of vocational training, and not to speak about the results over the last year or the years before. But still, Switzerland has been invested in the dual vocational training system for the last 6 to 7 years. And as the minister said, we have now a few thousand students being enrolled in those schools, and the first batch of students are getting out and they're being employed. So actually the skills that they come with when they go to the market are the skills that the market needs. So we've been working really on pushing this reform, and the minister also said that 2 laws are essential for this pilot, if I can still call it pilot initiative or program, to really be scaled up and to become systemic and nationals, is to have 2 laws the law on secondary education and the law on vocational training to be adopted by the Parliament. So those laws have been also developed with the support of Switzerland. It was approved, they were approved last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago by the government, and now they will be discussed in the Parliament. And I think it's very important that those laws pass, because then it gives more space for these reforms to happen. There are a lot of challenges that needs to be overcome to have the right skills for the market, or the labor market, to function. Primary education, we already mentioned this. So PISA results came out. It's quite worrying, the figures that come out, and I think it's really important to really improve this primary education, because then we can build a secondary or vocational training on the basis of this reform. So here I think it's a big priority, as the minister said, to really work on that, and development partners should really join forces to really make this happen. There is also a big challenge in North Macedonia, or in the Western Balkans in general, immigration. I think we all know that many young people are leaving the country either for studying, and very often they don't come back after their studies, or to get an employment abroad. I think it's important that job opportunities are creating in this country with the right working conditions, and that the private sector is actually involved in the reform process for vocational training, because the private sector knows what they need as skills and knowledge and types of formation. They can really influence the development of curriculum, and then they can ask the system to train the young people or the children according to the needs of the market. If we don't have this connection between the private sector, the vocational training centers, and the government, it's going to be extremely difficult to train the youth according to the needs of the market, and for them to have a good job opportunity. But what our experience have shown is that well-trained students or youth, they can get a job here. And many of them, if they have an opportunity to stay here, would like to stay. So we really have to build on that. But immigration and how to retain the young generation here, or how to make them come back, is really essential. It is much broader than what we're discussing on this panel. We will also look, and together with development partners, with the government, on green jobs. So I think it's important now to also think how we can actually prepare the young generation in this green transition. We know there is the EU integration process. We know that you have new standards, so the employment, social, environmental standards. So what kind of skills will be necessary for the private sector to comply with all those European standards? So I think we also need to engage in that. We have started. It's not an easy topic, and not with easy solutions, but again, we need to engage with the private sector, with the government, to really know what kind of new jobs will be necessary for this greenery of the private sector. And maybe I will stop here, because my time is over. But still, on dual vocational training system, I really underline and want to stress it's important to really engage with the private sector, because they really know what is necessary, what kind of skills they need, and this partnership between the government, training institution, and the private sector is really key. Thank you very much.
Ви благодарам. Меѓународните фондови, меѓународните...
Thank you. The international funds and organizations are important in terms of the financial aid, but also, I would say, in terms of the monitoring and evaluation of the processes, because we have constant monitoring and control of what is happening, and reminders of the commitments to obligations. The World Bank has been involved in this several years. Can you tell us some more about the involvement of World Bank in the creation of strategic approaches in the country, the terminology, including investment in human capital, is always present. Among other things, the World Bank strongly supported the creation of human capital strategy, as well as many others short and long-term strategic solutions. Can you please say something more? Thank you very much. First of all, I thank you for the invitation, and Greetings to the ministry, the panelists, and the colleagues attending this conference. Let me start by saying that recently we celebrated 30 years of successful cooperation with the Republic of North Macedonia and used this moment not only to celebrate the commonly achieved results, but even more to think about what the challenges of the country are, not only on its way to European integration, but also what is most important for a country, and that is providing welfare for its citizens. So in this area, several issues stood out for the purposes of this conference. Let me mention that we all agree that the country is faced with a double challenge, and that is aging and immigration. These phenomena are not specific for our country only. We all know that it is a both European and global trend, and what is good is that these trends are visible and recognizable, and they're not shocks as the COVID, but are continuous processes, and this is why provide opportunities for the government to develop measures to be introduced to reduce the influence. We will never eliminate the impact. This is the situation in the country, such as the situation in countries that are not faced with the aging and immigration phenomenon, but smart countries invest efforts in have benefit of these processes. While it may seem absurd to an extent, we have also positive examples of countries gaining benefits. And the third aspect that we devoted a great deal of attention during the month of celebration of 30 years of partnership with the government was human capital and the state of affairs in this area. You have all heard that the World Bank conducts a follow-up every 2 years in terms of measurement. It has established its human capital index and measures it in each of the countries, and this actually measures the productivity of the human capital in the countries. In our country, this index is 56, meaning that a child born today will have an opportunity to use 56% of the possibility to use its education as compared to the opportunities in countries where the educational situation is at a higher level. It is better than the previous one, which was 54, but it's still far from the average of the European Union that we aspire to. And it was exactly because of this the government asked for technical assistance from the World Bank in developing a human capital strategy that will be national instead of a partisan. It will not cover one ministry, but will be multi-sectoral and with the participation and inclusion of the Ministry of Finance, because as Patricia mentioned, the efficient financing is key to achieving results, and I am glad to say that this strategy was approved by the government in January and will constitute the basis not only for the World Bank, but for investments, and these should be both party interests, and they should take into consideration the needs of all citizens. The strategy underlines assistance to also people with disabilities, and to not only the access, which is of huge importance. The first thing you need is access to to services, but also to high quality services, which is something that we yet need to achieve to raise the quality of the services that are becoming increasingly accessible and as I said, financing, but efficient financing in terms of where the money is spent. If we have money and do not know how to spend it, it becomes a burden on the state. And I'm very glad that we are working together with UNICEF in several areas to improve the efficiency of spending in the area of education. And independently, we work with the Ministry of Finance and the one on labor and social policy on efficiency in spending. And the fourth aspect is management. It is of high importance that all institutions that are within these ministries and the ministries themselves to improve their management capacities. Thank you. I apologize. There is this strategic document that is to be approved or adopted by the World Bank. It's the new strategy for cooperation with the government, which in the 2024-2028 period, which is also as a basic feature, has the support of the government in terms of better and more and green jobs and investments in human capital to achieve and accelerate its integration in the EU. Thank you. And this information that you shared is something nice to hear, and it coincides with the terms of adopting this strategy and our conference in this panel. The international organizations and funds often also provide international experts that are very important in sharing the best experiences and practice in their countries. Well, the national experts are also equally important because they can share their own experience and are very familiar with the national aspects. Along these lines, we have a professor here with us, a university professor working on the development of numerous analysis and strategic documents, mostly related to the mental health as a result of his work and the topicality of this issue. It has always been topical, but the COVID pandemics reminded us we have to pay a lot of attention to mental health. And Mr. Barriatero worked on the development of the mental health strategy, another document that obliges all of us. It was adopted by the government last week. When I mentioned the national expert, let me also say that in addition to the monitoring by the external bodies are capable of providing good assessment of how much they are inspired by the ministry, because people in the ministries change, but our obligation for continuous cooperation remains when we have a common goal. Can you please share your assessment on the mutual cooperation between the three ministries that are together with us today? Thank you. First of all, let me express my gratitude for the invitation and the attention that mental health is receiving. Dear representatives of international organizations, I would like to personally thank all of you for your personal involvement and support, and I believe mental health was something that was actually accentuated by the COVID pandemics, but is an area in which we can see successful cooperation and coordinated activities of several ministries. First of all, the Ministry of Health, Finance and Labor and Social Policies that worked on these national documents together. Let me focus on three lines of European modernization that we're working in, and that is development of national strategies, support for national capacities, and human resources. None of this will be done in line with the European standards if we do not have the support of the key institution, and these are the institutions of the United Nations, UNICEF, the World Bank. Let me start with the National Strategy on Mental Health, which was adopted in 2018, along with the standards that are imposed or provided by the WHO. The latest strategies are developed, including these standards, and I believe these documents, especially the last one, that will also include an action plan, will global examples of implementing these programs, but I also have to mention that never before, although we've been talking about this for years, the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy has never been so essentially involved in this issue on several levels. When talking about the increasing and enhancing institutional capacities, the initiative of the Ministry of Health together with the World Bank is key importance. We're implementing at the clinic, psychiatric clinics, and this will meet the highest international standards, and will have a fine institution meeting these standards. When talking about human resources, I must say that the support that came from UNICEF helped us to introduce standards that are very rare in this country, but also to realize our capacities and insufficiencies, which we do not very often talk about, but also the supports during COVID for children and women in the prenatal period yielded excellent results and were assessed with the highest possible grade, which also speaks about the capacities of our institutions that I believe are at the European level. We are quick to criticize the University of Sierra Methodist, but this research showed that our institutions are working in line with the highest possible standard, because I think that these all provided key support not only in this period but a long-term period. The WH support has been here since 2020 until now and has greatly contributed to overall respect of the rights of patients. Thank you. We often talk about changes, social changes requiring digitalization, technological development, but at the end of the day, we always come back to that the care for mental health also means care for the well-being of each and every citizen. Let us go with another round of questions and going back to the Minister of Health, who is at the same time a physician himself and has the experience of working with patients and something that he's personally experienced at his job. What are the reforms implemented in the healthcare system to bring the healthcare services closer to the European standards? To be honest, there was this reform in the primary healthcare that was not started by me with the assistance of the World Bank or WHO, but no one seemed to complete this reform. So due to the reform that we, the patients, do not have to go to the specialists for their basic needs, and their general practitioners are very esteemed. We are a country that is an example of implementing this strategy, because we were praised, personally applauded by the director of the WHO, which has been as an organization our key partner and supports of our efforts. This is yet another proof that we as a ministry meet the demand of all the patients. That means that all retired persons that are exhausted. You know, you can imagine the ordeal when they will go through. A patient, in order to get their medicine, will have to wait for several weeks for their specialist to be available, and if they are away on a holiday, their specialist, they will need to go get another term scheduled. And for 10 months in the Ministry of Health, we did almost nothing because the situation in this area are complex. So we did nothing but simplify these things so that they can enjoy their rights guaranteed under the Constitution. Some say that we have been revising the positive list for 13, 15 years. I don't know why it has not been revised. So you will see in less than a week that 10 more medications will be included on this positive list and will not be at the cost of the budget of the patient. As a Ministry of Health, we take pride in the fact that we managed, with the support of UNICEF and USAID, for the first time, to such a scale, to provide data, mental health data, as the esteemed director of the psychiatric clinic said, in adolescents in their families and women in their prenatal period. The Ministry of Health already has a strategy that was not there in the past on mental health, and it will cover the period between 2018 and 2020. For the first time, this was introduced with the assistance of the European Union. We expect specific projects and action plans in this year. Mental health is a silent epidemic following the COVID-1, especially among children and young people, and that is why we will follow the recommendations provided for us. And the main news, as I said, is the fact that, I apologize, that was all that I had to say. Let me only add to this conference topics, and if I can abuse to an extent this event, and to appeal to everyone, it is high time for us as politicians from, as we are now called, Western Balkan, to dress nicely and wear nice ties and learn 4 or 5 phrases and keep repeating those phrases, but do nothing for the benefit of our citizens. And this is why my appeal goes to both the public and the institutions. It is high time to change this mental attitude, starting with ourselves. I have been criticized by both journalists and patients. There is no need. I'm so self-critical that there is no need for anyone else to criticize myself. That's why I appeal that we do change our mental attitude, because we are all potential patients. This is why social responsibility and official responsibility should be above all, and especially above personal interests.
Thank you for this message in the end, for getting the politicians closer to the general public, but also getting the services closer. Need to keep citizens closer and keep them within smaller local communities where they are, instead of sending them to major cities. And I started with the screening process that was successful, and Minister Maricic spoke about that in the area of education. Our legislation is in harmony with the EU acquis, but I would like to hear from the Minister of Education what the plans are for the for this year and how to accommodate our standards to the EU standards. Thank you for the question. The first is connected to the second one, how to get to the better quality education. And those plans where education is not a process where specific results can be expected within a period of 1 month, 6 months, or 2 or 3 years. It is a process where the results can be expected in a longer period of time. I am glad with the fact that the new 2024 budget provides a higher budget for education compared to the previous year. In terms of the corrected budget of the previous year, a budget higher by 4.4%, which means that education is set as priority by our government in terms of better quality education. Number two, it would have been easier if this budget included less amounts for capital investments, or if we had more such investments completed in the previous period of 10 to 20 years, because the budget would be higher for teachers and training and so on and so forth. However, it is a fact, and priority number one will be a few new schools because they're facing very bad conditions. We will have renovation of more than 90 schools in this calendar year, and our first priority will be capital investments. But a good fact mentioned by Patricia in terms of capital investment, we as a ministry and office within this period, in addition to considering the priority capital investments, pay great attention to the optimization that gives hope in primary education, because as we can see, figures and data speak about the necessary optimization in primary education, and therefore in terms of capital investments, we are working on this strategy as well. If prior to the beginning of my term of office, we had the issue of whether to continue or how to continue with the educational reform, the PISA results proved PISA results provide this fact, the pride that I have in those children that studied during the previous years, and it is required to have a reform. Any reform leaves room for discussion and for update. However, there is another reform that students will continue in addition to the reform, and in terms of technical implementation of PISA testing, I myself as a minister decided to have a coordinator for PISA testing to be as coordinated as possible, and through this reform I'm convinced that when this generation is tested for the first time, we'll get better results as a result of the new reform. In terms of secondary education, we'll have to move on with the vocational education strategy, also the new laws and the new concepts coming from the EU member states in terms of the environment and IT content, programming. All of these aspects are introduced into the new pieces of legislation, and in terms of dual education, I am glad to say that we are finalizing the investment into 2 educational centers in Kumanovo and Ohrid, and in the course of next week, construction works will start in Tetovo as well. And we added 2 new vocational centers in the municipalities of Veles and Strumica. So this concept should be developed as much as possible, and also find ways to include the economic sector, the business sector, the companies supporting dual education to get as many benefits as possible. And both in primary and secondary educations, there is career advancement of all those teachers, the ones who have never advanced in their career. Now they can be coordinators and mentors both in primary and secondary schools. So there is some career advancement. I'll take the opportunity here to add to what the director has mentioned. Together with UNICEF, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, we're working on mental health of students together with the Bureau for Development of Education. So in addition to the strategy and papers, curricula should contain some content related to mental education. The priority is also given to higher education, but compared to in terms of the latest regulations, the higher education is autonomous, and the greatest contribution they can give to the better quality education are the ones who take part in the higher education institutions. Thank you once again. Thank you. Direct or indirect support for higher education is again going back to the cycle of primary and secondary education, because any professional goes first through higher education, then to be able to get the practice of working with our future students. The minister went back to mental health, and I would start the discussion here. The second question with the Minister of Labour and Social Policy. The first question was aimed at the youth. Now, I would say that this is about a minister who paid a lot of energy and attention to young people. Last year, we developed a new youth strategy and other national strategic documents related to young people. We topicalized youth workers, activism, volunteering, and to that end, I would like to hear what the collaboration with young people is like, and to what extent the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy is involved in this area, and how directly or indirectly it is involved in working on the well-being of young people in the country. Thank you for the question. The first question was related to young people, to children, preschool education. The second is related to youth, and extreme attention is given precisely to young people through all those policies, programs, and measures implemented by the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy, the operational plan for employment through the active employment measures and programs that give the opportunity to many young people. And you will see our commitment through the fact that year in, year out, we are increasingly raising the funds aimed at the employment operational plan. The new operational plan has secured funds for 2 million, which are greater by 2 million euros compared to the last years, and 2 million euros precisely from the ministry's budget are aimed at young people and measures included in these programs. The most attractive measure of self-employment that is extremely attractive and used by young people provides a grant to young people increased by 20% this year, amounting to 6,000 euros if one founder of private company appears, or 12,000 euros if there are stakeholders in the company. And we are hearing the youth to adjust our policies to their needs, and I would mention the youth guarantee here through the law on youth guarantee, youth allowance. Everybody who finds employment in manufacturing after completing their secondary education would receive, regardless of their monthly income, an allowance amounting to 3,000 denars until they turn 23 years of age. And this measure is quite utilized by young people. In the period between 2020 and 2023, 13,000 young people used this measure. And in the discussions with young people, we found that they indeed find these additional funds important because their personal budget is increased. And I believe that in the coming period will increase the range and coverage, and also the allowance aimed at young people. Mental health is an issue that is rather topical, especially after the corona crisis and all of those crises seen by the world globally in our country, and as a ministry we have quite a few competencies in this area, taking into account young people as well, and therefore the strategy on youth mental health that was drafted through the participation of relevant ministry stakeholders and civil society organizations, youth civil society organizations, was adopted by the government, covering the period 2024-26, and we are implementing it. There are measures and policies in place in all ministries, and together with youth civil society organizations in the coming period, we'll start implementing it to preserve their mental health. Patricia mentioned the Walk and Talk campaign, one of the campaigns that we implemented as a ministry together with UNICEF and the Association of Scouts of Macedonia, and it is a civil society organization. Within this campaign, 500 high school students were involved through play and talking, and that is the title of the campaign itself, to spend 2 hours together with young people talking about all the issues faced by them and the ways they can use to resolve these issues, of course, in the presence of professionals. And the campaign, I believe, provided great results and response on the part of young people. We covered 16 cities and we included young people from these 16 cities, and I believe that this campaign will become a tradition to discuss precisely the issues faced by young people, to be able to resolve them together through the institutions, certainly supported by international organizations and civil society organizations. And when we talk about young people and their mental health and well-being, which was also mentioned by the Swiss ambassador, is the labor market participation, and we signed the new loan with the World Bank on the 16th of January, and we are commencing its implementation, where in addition to social services providing great results across the municipalities in the country, we are focusing on activating young people and activating all minimum welfare assistance beneficiaries. We hear the private sector, we hear the citizens, in order for them to have greater income in their families, thus enhancing their well-being. Thank you. I am glad that the Minister of Education and the Minister of Labor and Social Policy feel very nice in the presence of young people, and I personally felt it, and also I felt that as a member of the academia together with the university students, where they discuss the challenges faced by them and where we discuss finding solutions together to create a nice atmosphere and pleasant atmosphere, where they promise that what young people do not like at that point in time, they will find ways to resolve these issues in their interest. In her discussion, the minister mentioned the collaboration with both the embassy, the World Bank, and the United Nations organization, child organization, UNICEF, again to overcome the uncertainty. Will be disturbing the order. I'll expect the answer from UNICEF representative in terms of the projects implemented last year by your organization in collaboration with the national ministries and organizations. Now, I would like you to share with us what you, as UNICEF, monitoring the challenges faced by children in Macedonia, what do you plan for 2024?
Thank you. I'm going to go off script a bit, and I'm going to raise only 3 points, and I hope they're sweet, concise, and they're efficient. One is that we have the concluding observation to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which were only given out a year ago, that set out a very, very clear roadmap on how this country can meet its commitments under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And these are very much in line with the EU accession plans. I have a list, 3 pages, of projects we plan to do. I have 3 ministers who are going to sign annual work plans, hopefully in the next 7 days, on our future work. And this goes from parenting strategies to working with disabilities, working with early childhood interventions, you name it. We've spread ourselves quite thin. But my first point is that's all in the concluding observations as a work plan. My second point that I'd like to take, maybe the example of Minister Majiti and speak off the cuff, is that there are several laws. I'm going to take advantage of this audience. There are several laws that are currently sitting in Parliament or in government which affect young people and children. And I highly urge you all to pass those laws. Highly urge you. And related to that is my third point. And I am making an appeal to not politicise children and youth issues in the coming 6 months. Please do not do that to the children of this country. As you are going into an election, there are very clear ways forward, and I see that all parties are interested in the welfare of children. And for this, I want to use education as an example, because education is not just Minister Yeton's business. I'm sorry. We've been working with mayors, we've been working with MPs, we've been working with civil society, not to politicise curriculum reform, not to politicise moving education forward, and that's got to extend to not politicising children's issues and youth issues in general. So I've gone under time, and thank you for entertaining my going off script. I'd rather do this than go through a whole shopping list of the issues that we're going to work, because we're going to continue being here. We've been here for 30 years, we're going to continue being here until the business is finished. But the business is far from finished yet. And so that's my appeal. Education is a priority, but so are all the other children's issues. Immunisation, we'll be working in areas of child nutrition. There is a crisis in this country and we need to address it, and we don't need to politicise it any further than it already is. Blagodaram, gotovo from me.
Благодарам.
Thank you. The education system should not only prepare students for academic achievements, but equip them with a series of other soft skills sometimes offered by the informal education, but we also have to strengthen the capacities of teachers and continue with what, again, in the education and among adults. And we said that the Swiss embassy invests funds and energy and resources strengthening skills and employability of our young people, which what do you think is something you could organize as additional activities and is lacking in this country?
It's a very big question. So what I can say is that dual vocational training and skills development for the youth will remain a big priority of the Swiss government in North Macedonia, and we will partner with all actors, so of course the government and the ministry in particular, but as I said before, also with the private sector, because they need to be involved in this discussion. So creating and supporting those reforms, and here also we have 2 laws which have been or will be submitted to the Parliament on secondary education and vocational training. It's also important that those 2 laws are adopted, and I think there was a lot of dialogue with all the political forces in the country to make sure that the ground to understand those laws and to support them in the Parliament is set, and hopefully they will be adopted in the month or weeks to come. But it's really important to have those laws to be able to really have a systemic change in terms of vocational training and dual vocational training. My second point, and I have said this at the beginning, is really try to create a platform, a set platform to engage with the private sector. When I look at the Swiss experience, actually the private sector is the driving force for vocational training and dual vocational training. They are the one leading the process, and the government then help them to have the facilities, the budget and so forth, but they are the one who really establish and define what skills is necessary for the market and how to prepare the youth to be employed in the market. So really involving the private sector is key, and the minister also said that what we have done with the ministry is also part of this. And in the program that we've been supporting so far, more than 500 enterprises have been involved and have expressed interest, not only to work with the vocational training, but also to have some places in their companies to employ the young generation, or to have this practical experience, not only to be theoretical, but also to be practical and to be exposed to the private sector and the life of private sector. Also this move from more almost only theory to really have a more balance between theory and practical work in a company actually also help the students and the youth to really adjust to the needs of the market. And maybe a third point is really about the new skills that will be necessary for the private sector here to compete with the EU and EU standards. It's really the ESG, so the environment, social and governance standard, and also greening the economy. So what skills will be necessary for the private sector to compete with those new norms and regulation that you have, and also for the Swiss actually, that we have in the European countries. So also preparing the youth, but also thinking what skills will be necessary in the future to be able to integrate the market and to remain competitive here. I think that's very important. And the last point maybe, because the Minister of Labour and Social Affairs mentioned that, immigration is a big issue, and we start missing some skilled labor force in North Macedonia. It's very difficult, and I think all of you know that for a company to recruit some young workers is extremely difficult. So labor activation and making sure that you have more people moving from the green economy to the formal economy, from an inactive population, especially the youth, to become active. I think the reforms in this field is really important. I know there is a reform on the social reform and social networks, so I think it needs to come to really facilitate this move from the grey economy and for inactive youth to really enter in the economy, and how we can also support that, and we also see how we can also support this process. So thank you very much. Благодарам.
Ви благодарам, се надевам дека со заедничка соработка и во иднина се.
Thank you. I hope that with cooperation in the future we'll have more and more workers on the labor market through strengthening the skills of high school students and self-employment skills. So we will have happy workers in the future, but also additional strong young leaders that will ensure the prosperous future of the country. All the speakers, many of the speakers mentioned part of the activities of the World Bank. The first question to you, Mr. Natseva, we talked about the contribution and cooperation with the national institutions in terms of development of strategic documents in this area. While we may have already found the answers in some of the speeches of the panelists, can you tell us more directly what it is that you have worked on with the ministries and some of the activities that have commenced and will go on throughout the year? What is the plan for this year? Thank you for the question. Let me mention that the World Bank plans its activities in more mid and in a long-term way, and 2024 will focus on continuation on the activities and projects that we work on together with the Ministry of Finance, and the one on labor and social policy, and the new framework, which, as I said, is to be adopted today, includes additional projects and operations in the healthcare, education, and labor areas. What I would like to underline is the advantage of having the World Bank as a partner of this government. There are not only the funds that it can bring into the country, but also the analytical, the increasing of the analytical capacities of the ministry, so working on analytical documents that we develop jointly and which I hope contributes to the state basing its policies on facts instead of on opinions and positions of individuals. This is the way in which we will continue our cooperation with the ministry, because all of our operations are based on previous analysis of the gaps, issues and challenges, what are the systemic gaps are that need to be overcome so that we can see progress in the long run. The Minister of Education was right to mention that in all of these three areas, results cannot be visible overnight, and this is why these reforms are the most difficult ones and are the ones that are mostly criticized, but it takes only strong government and leaders for us to make a step forward in these areas. No government should be discouraged by saying that investments in human capital will not be visible, maybe within the term of one political, one government, and all these issues actually demand above party agreements. I appreciate what Patricia says, that these sectors should not be politicized, because we are all users of the services of these three ministries, and it is our task as international partners of the government to help establish healthy basis and true systemic solutions that will yield good results. Maybe not this year or the next year, but within few years. So let me mention some of them. The social reforms. It's one of the best social reforms, not only in the regions, but wider, that has happened in the country. Huge results. Better targeting, channeling funds to the poor, more benefits for the vulnerable groups, social services that are not developed throughout the entire country. And the second operation we will work on together this year will allow for these services to be provided to all in need, especially the elder and the most vulnerable categories, because the analysis we did with the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, we came to understand that it's not the right of every child and elderly citizen to decent life, but women in our country are much less active on the labor market because there is this belief that they should take care of women and the elderly. If we provide these services, we will empower women to go on the labor market and gain financial independence, and thus the well-being to the whole family. With the Ministry of Education, we will continue working on the reforms in the elementary education, the increasing the resilience of the educational system, improvement of the learning environment, and I hope that this year we will rejoice together with the colleagues in UNICEF and the ministry the new financing formulas that will we will see optimization that does not involve closing schools, but making use of the space. If we do not have kindergartens, that's one of the goals we can use it. And I hope that this year, together with the Ministry of Health, we will start the project related to the primary healthcare services, because analysis show that the weakest link in coping with such crisis in the healthcare was the primary level of healthcare, which is the most important for obvious preventive reasons. And in this area, this will be our focus as well on long-term care and improvement of the methods of financing of the healthcare system. Thank you, thank you. When it comes to thinking about the social services, we almost always connect them to local services, but when we talk about healthcare protection, and we also they are associated with experiences abroad, and we often expect cooperation with organizations with positive experience and methods of operation along these lines. Professor Bayraktar, how much your clinic and the Ministry of Health and other health institutions cooperate with other health institutions outside of the country, and how much this type of cooperation can improve the healthcare services for our citizens. First of all, let me add to something that the World Bank representative said. I agree. The mental health is an issue that should not be politicized, and that we need an above party platform, and I believe we need to be talking about the commitment and success operation of various stakeholders. We have seen numerous programs and activities in the past period aimed at improvement and promotion of the mental health of the entire population. But let me mention today a fine example, because with the support of the WHO, we have been working on re-socialization and reintegration programs of our patients, but these processes are the same or similar everywhere. And I'm very glad that we have been able to help the users and the group in the Ministry of Labor Social Politics to children accommodated in group homes. It was an exceptional step that we made because it took place during the COVID crisis. This is where the cooperation with foreign institutions come into place, because that's how we do it. We took the stuff to Trieste in Italy, where the most successful resocialization reintegration centers are, and that's where we learned these ways. As for the successful of our programs, is what was mentioned by our esteemed Minister of Health, because the first activity of the project for support of the European of our national health strategy is the reform of the children's psychiatry, and this is something we will be done in cooperation with the international organization. We invited a professor from Slovenia who developed the program, and we will build the system in line with the Slovenian model. We also cooperate with many people of Macedonian origin no longer living here, and I think that our system is underestimated. A professor from NIM, where we have had cooperation for many years, is excellent, and we have excellent cooperation with all the university institutions in the region. We have joint programs with Serbia and Croatia, excellent cooperation with the Faculty of Psychology in Pristina, Kosovo. We have excellent cooperation throughout the region, most of all with Albania, a country my colleague that I have cooperated with for many years comes from. So I can say that we have a true network, and I assume this is what was recognized by the EU, and that's why it's placed this issue at a high place in terms of European integration. Thank you. You all, everything that you said proves that you have professional and true cooperation and coordination with all the other ministries. Those who were not able to come to be here with us due to the time limits that we, of course, exceeded. There are many other organizations that can be resourced. We have the European opportunities in front of us. It is up to us to make the best use of them and thus contribute to the creation of the best possibilities and opportunities for our citizens in terms of developing services in the field of education, health care, and labor and social policy. I thank you all for being with us here, and I thank the guests for being patient and staying all the way to the end. This